Chapter 1. The wound in the force before the name, before the face. There was only pain. There was a sound beneath all sounds, the screaming of a galaxy being torn in half. It began on Malachor V, where the sky cracked and the planet bled into the stars. It began with war. The Mandalorian crusades had raged like wildfire, and the Jedi had refused to burn until one of their own, a general named Mitra Surik, defied the Council's silence. She led her armies to the edge of the known galaxy, to the tomb world of Malachor, where the final battle waited like a trap set by time itself. But the true ending was not forged in battle. It came in silence. It came in light so pure it unmade everything it touched. The mass shadow generator, a super weapon conceived in desperation, was activated in a moment of finality. Gravity screamed. Warships buckled. Entire fleets were crushed into the bones of the world. The Force itself shuddered, as if reality had been flayed open by the sheer scale of death. In that instant, something ancient woke, or something new was born. The battlefield did not just collapse, it wounded the Force. The energy that binds all life cried out, and where that cry echoed, a vacuum formed. A hollow, a hunger. He was there, not as a warrior, not as a Sith, not as anything yet named. He was only a survivor, a man broken in the crucible of death. His mind, unable to comprehend the annihilation around him, shattered. His soul, torn from the currents of the Force, began to drift, and in the drifting it fed. He did not eat food, he did not drink water. He consumed the raw essence of death, the screams, the ghosts, the severed threads of the fallen. And he did not stop. Malachor. V became a grave, but it also became a birthing place, a dark nativity not of life, but of absence. All who died there left behind fragments of pain, and this wandering shell of a man absorbed them like breath. He did not mourn, he did not speak, he did not remember his name. Only the hunger remained, hunger without shape, hunger without end. Others who survived whispered of shadows, moving through the wreckage, of a figure who drifted above the ground, never touching, never seen in full light. They called him a spirit, a demon, a Sith wraith drawn to dying breath. But what they saw was not myth. It was the Force unraveling itself, retreating from what it could no longer explain. He walked across the broken crust of Malachor for years without aging. His body faded, his voice disappeared. The man he once was died beneath the weight of the scream. In his place stood an echo, sentient hunger, wrapped in robes that no longer clung to flesh. He was becoming something other across the galaxy. Jedi began to feel it, the ache, the silence. Some called it a tremor, others a sickness. But those closest to the old ways knew what it truly was, a wound in the Force, not a scar. A scar heals, a wound festers, it spreads, it consumes. The Jedi could not trace its origin, for it did not move in lines. It moved in absence. Worlds would flicker out from the maps. Entire cities would fall still, their inhabitants lost without sign of battle. It was as though the Force had chosen to forget them. In truth, the Force had not forgotten. It had been devoured. He was drawn to it, drawn to wounds in others, to pain, to trauma, to the voids left behind by war. Like a beast smelling blood, he hunted the weak points in the galaxy's soul, and in feeding, he grew more real, not in body, in presence, in shadow, in dread. He began to pull more from the Force than he returned, creating ripples, distortions, unnatural silences. He had become a hole in the fabric of existence, and yet, in this nothingness, the dark side found a vessel. It whispered to him through the wound. It showed him visions of domination, of power beyond the flesh. It taught him to mask his hunger, to shape it, to wield it like a blade. And in time, it gave him a name, Darth Nihilus, a name that meant nothing, a title that was not a crown, but a curse, for what he was could never be sated. His identity was a void wearing a mask, and his power was unmaking. But before he became that name, he was only the scream, only the echo, a whisper born from a galaxy's agony. And still he wandered. Malachor's skies were blackened for centuries. Its surface remained cracked like a corpse left under too many suns. But in the deepest crevices, where time had folded into ritual, the dark side gathered in still pools. The Traeus Academy, long buried, began to wake. It heard the echo. It answered the hunger. And the hollow being who had survived the mass shadow walked into its halls, drawn not by thought but by instinct. There, in those dead chambers, the Sith whispered again, not in words, but in ritual, in pain, in loss. The Force did not move there as it did elsewhere. It pooled unnaturally. It clung to despair. And the being who would become Nihilus did not resist. He surrendered to it. Or perhaps it surrendered to him. And somewhere deep in that tomb of forgotten rituals, the Force fractured again. He no longer remembered his name. He no longer remembered the stars. But he remembered the taste of death, of silence, of Force fading. He did not desire conquest. He did not want revenge. He only wanted to feed, for to starve was to remember he once lived. The galaxy had given birth to a wound, and now the wound had a name, but names are fragile, and hunger is eternal. Chapter 2. That which hungers, he was not man, not spirit, but a void that consumed all. The galaxy whispered of hunger in the dark. The stars themselves flickered uneasily, as if feeling the shadow stretch its fingers across the void between them. After the death of Malachor's light, a being emerged, not born, but forged from absence and anguish. He drifted like a wraith across star systems, a presence unseen yet all-consuming. His name was spoken only in fear and silence. Nihilus, Nihilus, did not hunger for flesh nor blood. He hungered for the very essence of life, the Force itself. Where others felt the pulse of existence, he felt the empty spaces between, the cold hollows left by death and despair. It was here that his power grew in consuming the vitality of worlds and beings alike. Planets once teeming with life grew silent under his shadow. Entire civilizations vanished like ghosts at dawn, their memories swallowed without trace. His hunger was endless, insatiable. No matter how much he consumed, the void inside him deepened, echoing with whispers of forgotten pain. He did not wield a lightsaber as others did. His weapon was absence, a dark shroud that smothered hope and light. When he passed, the Force itself recoiled. Jedi who tried to oppose him found themselves drained, their connection to the Force severed as if swallowed whole. His presence was a wound, spreading with silent inevitability. The dark side fed him, but it did not guide him. His path was not one of will, but of instinct, a blind hunger driving him onward. His form was a mask, shattered and cracked, concealing the emptiness beneath. No eyes stared from within, only the endless void of a starless night. To see him was to feel the cold fingers of oblivion brush your soul. Yet this hollow god was not alone. Drawn by the same dark whispers, others came to stand with him, not as allies, but as reflections of pain and ruin. Together they formed a covenant of ruin and vengeance. But Nihilus stood apart, neither master nor servant. He was the hunger that could never be sated. Across the galaxy, his name became a curse, spoken by refugees, whispered by survivors, feared by those who clung to the fragile light. They called him a spirit of famine, a ravenous shadow, the devourer of worlds. To face him was not to battle, but to disappear. Yet there were those who sought to understand the void, to harness it, to control the hunger. Among them was Darth Traya, a Sith of twisted wisdom, and Darth Sion, a broken warrior bound by pain. Together they reached out to Nihilus, forming a dark trinity, the triumvirate. Each was shattered. Each sought purpose in ruin. But for Nihilus, purpose was a distant echo. He did not speak their language. He did not seek dominion. He only hungered. And in hunger, he became a god of oblivion. The galaxy could not stand against the void. Entire star systems fell silent beneath his passing. No battle cries, no final screams, only the slow fading of light and life. The Force itself trembled, uncertain if it would survive this new darkness. He was not a Sith as others were. He was a wound made flesh, a blight upon existence. His hunger was not merely for power, but for the very meaning of being. And in that hunger, he was eternal, and so the galaxy watched the shadow grow, and the shadow watched the galaxy fade. Chapter 3. The Covenant of Hatred Beneath the Shattered Sky. 3 broken souls wove a web of vengeance and despair. The ancient halls of the Trayus Academy lay hidden beneath the blood-soaked ground of Malachor V stone carved with forgotten runes, whispered their silent curses into the stagnant air. This was a place where the Force gathered not as light or dark, but as torment, raw, and unfiltered. Bleeding through cracks in time like poisoned water, into this tomb of shadows came 3 figures, each fractured by loss and driven by wrath. They were not merely Sith, but echoes of pain incarnate. Darth Traya, the master of betrayal and sorrow. Darth Sion, the living corpse fueled by unyielding agony. And the hollow god, Darth Nihilus, the devourer of life itself. Together they formed a pact, a covenant of hatred. They sought not empire nor conquest, but the annihilation of those who had wronged them, the Jedi who had abandoned truth, the galaxy that had forsaken them, the Force that had fractured. Their souls, Darth Traya, once Kriya, was the architect of this dark fellowship. Her mind was a labyrinth of deceit, her words dripping with poison and prophecy. She taught that suffering was the crucible of enlightenment, that betrayal was not an end, but a path to power. She saw the galaxy as a broken wheel, turning endlessly toward ruin, and sought to shatter it utterly. Darth Sion was the embodiment of unyielding will. His flesh was broken, torn by battle and death, yet he refused to die. His body was a mosaic of scars and open wounds, held together by hatred alone. Each breath was a defiance of oblivion, each step a curse against the natural order. Sion was pain made flesh, and pain was his weapon. Darth Nihilus, the hunger made manifest, drifted silently between them. Unlike Traya and Sion, he did not seek to rule or to be understood. He consumed, he destroyed. He was the echo of the massed shadows' devastation, the living wound in the Force, Their covenant was forged not in trust, but in necessity. Each needed the others to survive the maelstrom of their own darkness. Yet beneath their alliance lurked suspicion, for hatred breeds betrayal like shadow breeds darkness. Together, the triumvirate wielded power that defied comprehension. They reshaped the force around them, twisting it into blades of despair, shields of pain, and storms of emptiness. Their enemies did not fall with a cry, but vanished as though erased from memory. Yet even within this dark fellowship, the seeds of ruin were sown. Darth Triad, the teacher and betrayer, manipulated both her companions and the remnants of the Jedi Order. Her lessons were veiled in riddles and half-truths, her loyalty a mask woven of deceit. To her, all were pieces on a board, pawns to be sacrificed for the promise of destruction. Darth Sion's rage was a raging tempest, burning away reason and mercy. He thirsted for vengeance against those who had cast him aside, against the galaxy that denied him peace. His body, broken and unwoe, was a testament to his unrelenting fury. Yet beneath the rage flickered a faint ember of doubt, a whisper that perhaps his path was not one of endless war, but of despair. Darth Nihilus, ever silent, consumed all light around him. His hunger could not be sated, for it was born of loss itself. His power grew with each life stolen, each star extinguished. He did not speak, but his silence was a language all its own, a language of death, of absence, of inevitability. From the depths of the Traus Academy, the triumvirate wove a plan to tear the galaxy asunder. Their first strike was to hunt the Jedi exile, Mitra Surik, the one who had shattered Malakor's fate and sealed the mass shadow's destruction. She was the living reminder of their pain, the embodiment of their failure. Their pursuit was relentless. Through shattered worlds and forgotten temples, through death and darkness, the triumvirate's shadow stretched. Jedi who dared to stand in their path vanished without trace. The Force itself trembled beneath their wrath. Yet, even as they sought to undo the past, the triumvirate was fractured from within. The silent hunger of Nihilus grew beyond control. Sion's torment threatened to consume his reason. Tri's manipulations twisted into webs that entrapped her own mind. Betrayal was inevitable. The covenant of hatred was both their strength and their undoing. And so, beneath the shattered sky of Malachor, where the air itself was thick with death, the triumvirate stood, not as masters of the galaxy, but as prisoners of their own torment, bound by a hunger that could never be filled. The galaxy would soon learn that hatred, like hunger, never rests. It only grows. Chapter 4, The Ravager wakes from the ashes of war. The shadow of hunger rises anew. The Ravager was no mere ship. It was a tomb, a throne, and a weapon wrapped in the darkness of the void. Once a Mandalorian warship, shattered and gutted in battle, it had been reborn not by steel and fire, but by the terrible breath of the dark side. The stars themselves recoiled as it stirred from its long silence. Its blackened hull, a scar against the cosmos. Within its hollow decks moved a presence older than death, Darth Nihilus. The hunger made flesh. The ship was his body. The ship was his mouth. It did not move by engines or piloted hands, but was guided by the ravenous will of a force that consumed life itself across the galaxy. The whisper of the Ravager's return spread like a cold plague. Worlds trembling on the edge of ruin felt the slow encroachment of death, as if the stars themselves were dimming under the weight of the hunger. The Ravager did not merely kill, it erased. It drank from the life of planets, leaving them barren. husks floating in the dark. No army could stand before it, no fortress could hold. For the Ravager was not flesh or bone, but a wound incarnate. Its approach was silent. It did not announce its arrival with war cries or fire. Instead, it bled into the galaxy like a sickness, unseen until it was too late. Entire systems faded from star charts. Their peoples vanished without battle or trace. Those who survived whispered of a darkness that swallowed light, of a presence felt but never seen. The Ravager was the void, made real. On board the Ravager, Nihilus drifted through endless corridors, his hollow eyes unblinking beneath his fractured mask. His body, if such it could be called, was less flesh and more shadow. His hunger pulsed like a heartbeat, growing with every passing moment, devouring the force around him with an insatiable thirst. He did not speak, he did not command, he only fed. Around him. The ship hummed with the dark energies that bound it, the remnants of Mandalorian war machines fused with Sith sorcery. The corridors twisted and writhed, responding to the hunger of their master. Hallways shifted like living things, shadows moving where no light could reach. The Ravager was alive in a way no mortal vessel could be, and it shared its master's endless craving. Yet, within the ship's hollow spaces stirred other presences. Servants of the dark, bound by fear and loyalty, moved like ghosts through the darkened decks. Among them was Visas Ma, the blind Miraluka, who had been claimed by Nihilus's hunger and remade in his shadow. She was both prisoner and acolyte, her soul tethered to the Ravager by threads of pain and obedience. Though she had no sight, her other senses were sharpened beyond mortal bounds, allowing her to perceive the currents of the force that twisted and ebbed like tides within the ship. Visas Ma's fate was entwined with Nihilus's hunger, where he was the empty void, she was the tether, the last fragile link between hunger and existence. Her loyalty wavered like a candle in the dark, for even blind eyes can see the shadows behind the mask. And in her heart a question stirred. Could the hunger be quelled? Could the hollow god be saved from himself? Outside the Ravager, the galaxy held its breath. The Mandalorians, fierce and proud, had once built great ships to rule the stars. The Ravager was a mockery of their craft, twisted and corrupted by darkness. Its presence was a blight on the memory of Mandalore, a living nightmare born of war and ruin, but the hunger driving it cared nothing for history or honor. It was an eternal force of destruction, and its purpose was unyielding. As the Ravager drifted through the void, a storm brewed in the Force, a gathering of light and shadow, of hope and despair. The Jedi exile, Mitra Surik, had returned from her self-imposed exile, carrying the weight of guilt and the scars of a fractured soul. She moved through the galaxy seeking redemption, unaware that the hunger she had once helped create now stalked the stars aboard the Ravager. The stage was set, the hunter and the hunted, bound by fate and wound, would soon meet in a clash not just of blades, but of existence itself. But before that meeting could come to pass, the Ravager would awaken fully, unleashing hunger upon worlds unprepared for the darkness to come. The galaxy's last light trembled beneath the shadow of a god born from void and hunger, and the hunger never sleeps. Chapter 5. Tellus under shadow, where healing was just a fragile hope, the hunger cast its blackened veil. Telos was a world marked by scars, both of the body and of the spirit. It had known war's cruel hand, yet its people had fought to rise again, to heal the deep wounds left by conflict. Cities, rebuilt from ash and ruin, reached toward the stars with fragile hope. The Jedi exile, Mitra Surik, had returned to this fragile cradle, carrying the weight of her own broken past, seeking to mend what had been shattered in herself and the galaxy. But light on Telos was thin and fragile, and shadows loomed long. Whispers came first. Silent ripples in the Force, echoes of emptiness where life should have been vibrant. Then came the disappearances. Farmers vanished from their fields, children lost to the night, entire villages swallowed by silence. The people spoke of a darkness, crawling just beyond the horizon, a hunger that did not eat flesh, but something far worse, the very essence of being. Mitra Surik felt it in the depths of her soul, a sickness, an absence, where the Force should flow like rivers of light. She was drawn to the world not by duty, but by the unspoken call of destiny. Telos was more than a home. It was the last beacon of hope before the void spread unchecked. As she returned, she found Telos struggling against ruin. The Republic's grip was weakening. Political factions vied for power, fractured by fear and distrust. The scars of war ran deep not only on the surface, but within the hearts of its people. The Jedi Order, once a bastion of peace, was fractured and uncertain, haunted by the ghosts of its failures. Among the remnants of the Jedi gathered to aid Telos, Mitra found allies, warriors, and scholars alike, those who had not forgotten the old ways, nor lost faith entirely. Together, they sought to rebuild, to prepare. But the shadow was already lengthening. The Ravager loomed in orbit, unseen yet felt. Its hunger pulsed through the Force like a sickness, draining the life of the planet, slowly but inexorably. Crops failed, rivers dried. The sky darkened as if the very sun were being devoured. Mitra Surik knew that this was no natural decay. It was the work of the hunger Darth Nihilus, the god of emptiness, who fed on the Force and left worlds as graves. His shadow reached deep into Telos, and to fight it, she would have to face the void itself. Her presence on Telos stirred unrest. Political leaders feared the growing darkness, but could not unite against it. Some saw the Jedi as relics, others as threats. The fragile peace cracked beneath the weight of fear and suspicion. In the midst of this, Mitra moved quietly, gathering knowledge and strength, seeking the hidden wounds beneath the world's surface. Her path was not solitary. Visa's Ma, once a servant of Nihilus, had begun to question her loyalty. Drawn by flickers of light in the darkness, Visa sought Mitra's guidance, torn between the pull of her master's hunger and the faint hope of redemption. Their meeting was not chance, but destiny weaving its intricate threads. Together, they delved into ancient ruins, seeking knowledge buried beneath centuries of dust and silence. They uncovered fragments of the past, echoes of the massed shadow's devastation, relics of the Traeus Academy, and warnings etched in forgotten tongues. The Force spoke in riddles, and only through patience and sacrifice could the truth be heard. Yet the hunger was patient as well. It did not rush but waited, consuming slowly, leaving destruction that was nearly invisible until too late. The people of Telos lived in fear of shadows that whispered at the edge of vision, of dreams haunted by emptiness. Mitra's heart bore the weight of this fear, for she knew that the hunger was no ordinary enemy. It was a wound in the Force, born of cataclysm and sustained by despair. To face it, she would have to confront not only Nihilus, but the darkness within herself. The Force was a living tapestry, woven with light and shadow, life and death. When the hunger fed, threads were severed. The balance faltered, And in that falter lay the fate of the galaxy. As Telos faltered beneath the growing shadow, Mitra Surik gathered her allies, Jedi who had survived the purges, warriors who had not lost hope, and those willing to stand against the void. They prepared for a battle, not just for a world, but for the very soul of the Force. The Ravager's hunger was awakening. Its shadows stretched toward Telos, seeking to drain its life and leave nothing but silence. And the last light before the darkness would have to burn brighter than ever. Chapter 6. The blind one sees in darkness without sight. A new vision was born. Visa Smar was a child of Qatar, a world once vibrant, now shattered and silenced beneath the ravages of hunger. She was born without sight, as many of her people were, Miraluka, gifted and cursed to perceive the Force as their only vision. To them, blindness was not a loss, but a doorway. The Force painted the world in hues unseen by eyes of flesh. Yet, even in the embrace of this gift, Visa's path would be forged in shadow. Qatar was her home, a place of deep tradition and ancient wisdom. Its temples rose like stone fingers reaching into the sky. Its forests whispered of long-forgotten teachings. But all was shattered when Darth Nihilus came. His hunger swept across Qatar like a plague, draining life, light, and hope. Entire populations vanished, swallowed by a void that left no trace. Only Visa survived, spared not by mercy, but by the hunger's cruel purpose. She awoke amidst the ruins, blind to the world of flesh, but piercingly aware of the chasms in the Force left by the devastation. Her soul was marked by loss, her heart tethered to the echoes of her fallen people. She was taken by Nihilus, drawn into his shadow, bound by pain and hunger to serve as his eyes in the dark. Visa Smar walked the decks of the Ravager, not as a prisoner, but as a consort of the void. Though sightless, she perceived the currents of the Force as vividly as any with eyes. She felt the pulse of hunger, the ebb of life, and the quiet death of worlds. She became the blind sentinel of the hollow god, guiding his path through the stars, yet within her a storm brewed. The hunger that bound her did not silence her spirit. Instead, it awakened a flicker of doubt, a whisper of light in the endless night. Memories of Qatar, of a people who had loved and lived, stirred. Beneath the shadows, the pain of loss became a question. Could the hunger be resisted? Could the void itself be defied? Visa's loyalty wavered like a fragile flame. She saw the suffering wrought by Nihilus's hunger, the emptiness left in his wake. Where others were devoured, she remained a witness and a warning. Her heart, though shrouded in darkness, yearned for more than the endless void. Fate led her to Metra Surik, the Jedi exile who bore the scars of Malachor and the weight of exile. Their meeting was not by chance, but the weaving of destiny's intricate threads. Mitra, burdened by guilt and haunted by her own fractures, found in Visa's a mirror, one bound by darkness, yet reaching toward light. Together, they forged a bond, fragile yet unbreakable. Visa's blindness was no hindrance, but a different kind of sight, a vision born of the Force's whispers and the spaces between stars. She guided Mitra not just with words, but with a perception that pierced the veils of hunger. In the silent corridors of the Ravager, where shadows danced and hunger whispered, Visa's presence was a beacon, quiet, unwavering, and resolute. Her journey was one of awakening, of seeing beyond the mask of emptiness that Nihilus wore. But the path was perilous. Nihilus's hunger was a force that devoured all, and his grasp on Visa's was as much of soul as of body. To break free was to face the void itself, to stare into the endless night without faltering. Visas's blindness was both curse and blessing. Where others saw only shadow and death, she saw the faintest glimmers of hope, threads of the force that the hunger had yet to claim. Her senses, sharpened beyond mortal bounds, sensed the slow unraveling of Nihilus's power, the cracks forming beneath the mask. She became the unseen eye of the exile, guiding her through the darkness that sought to consume them both. Their alliance was a fragile shield against oblivion, a testament that even in the deepest shadow, light could take root. The story of Visas Mar is a story of vision without sight, of strength born from vulnerability, and of the unyielding spirit that refuses to be swallowed by the void. In a galaxy trembling beneath the weight of hunger, the blind one saw beyond the darkness, and in seeing she chose to fight. Chapter 7, Echoes of Ketarth. Planet Ketar was quiet. Too quiet for a galaxy at war. High above its surface, the stars burned faintly through the thin shroud of mist that clung to the world like a funeral veil. The Miraluka had no need for eyes. They saw through the Force itself, and for them, Ketar was a sanctuary, a place where vision stretched beyond darkness. Here, the Jedi gathered, dozens of them, drawn by whispers, by rumors of a meeting that would restore balance. They sat within the stone halls, cloaked in silence, meditating as if serenity could smother a storm. But storms cannot be silenced. They only wait far beyond the reach of their senses. Something stirred. It was not a man, nor truly alive. It had once been flesh, but flesh had failed long ago. Now it was hunger pure and absolute, walking inside the hollow shell of a name, Nihilus. He felt them before they felt him. Through the void where his soul should have been, he tasted their presence. So many voices, so many currents in the Force, bright and strong. To most, it would have been overwhelming, blinding radiance. To Nihilus, it was agony. Each spark a wound, each breath a reminder of the life he could no longer claim. Pain fed hunger. Hunger drove him onward, and hunger always wins. He drifted through the dark of space aboard the Ravager, a vessel of bones and scars, broken yet alive through will alone. Its hull groaned as if in torment, yet obeyed its master's call. There were no commands spoken, no words, only the pull of need. The ship moved because Nihilus willed it, so Dot Satar lay ahead like an offering. The voices called to him, unguarded. Unknowing, they did not sense death approaching, because death had no presence in the Force. Death was absence, and Nihilus was absence made manifest. Inside the enclave, Jedi Master Vandor spoke softly to those gathered. His voice trembled with the weight of what was unsaid. The order is broken. The war has shattered us. We must endure or vanish. Around him, Miraluka and Jedi alike bowed their heads, blind eyes gazing into the unseen. Visas Mar knelt among them, her senses spread wide. The Force hummed like a distant storm. She had felt unease for days, a ripple in the void, but dismissed it as fear. Now it pressed closer, heavy as an eclipse. Then the world changed. It began with silence, not the quiet of peace, but a silence that devoured sound. Whispers died, breathing ceased. Even the hum of the Force fell mute. Visas reached outward, seeking her people's light, and found nothing. One by one, those bright flames winked out, not flickering, not screaming, simply gone, as if they had never existed. A sound followed, not a word, not truly. It was a resonance, low and endless, vibrating through marrow and mind. It was speech without language, meaning without form. To hear it was to drown in it. It pressed into her skull, into her soul, and where it touched, life withered. Jedi fell where they knelt. Some clutched at their throats. Others simply slumped, faces calm, as if surrendering to something inevitable. There were no lightsabers drawn, no cries of defiance. They died in silence because silence was the weapon. Visas tried to move. Her hands clawed at the floor, nails cracking against stone, but her limbs were lead. The force around her sight collapsed into a void, and in that void a shape appeared. Tall, cloaked in shadow deeper than night, a mask of bone white stared down at her, featureless save for two black slits that seemed to drink in light. It was not a face. It was the idea of a face, worn by something that had forgotten what faces were not. Nihilus. He spoke again, not aloud, but into the fabric of being. The sound was hunger given voice, a call to unmake. She felt it tear through her, stripping layers of self, memory, identity. Her sight faltered, her eyes useless as they were burned. Darkness poured in. When she opened them again, there was nothing. Blind, the massacre of Kutar lasted less than a whisper. When it ended, the planet was ash. The air turned to dust. Oceans boiled into nothing. Forests became grey husks. Every living thing, every Miraluka, every Jedi was gone, entirely erased, all but one. Visa's Ma lay broken among the ruins, breath shallow, heart fragile as glass. She should have died. She wanted to die. But a shadow loomed, and from its depths came a hand-gloved, skeletal in motion. It touched her brow, not with mercy, but with claim. She felt the hunger flow through her, cold and endless, like being pulled beneath black waters. It consumed not her body, but her will, hollowing her out until only a whisper remained. Her name still lingered, but it no longer belonged to her. It belonged to him. When Nihilus turned away, she followed, not because she wished to, but because she had been unmade. And in the space where self had lived, there was only obedience. Above the corpse of Kutar, the Ravager drifted in silence. Its master stood at the viewport, staring at the dead world below. Did he feel triumph, satisfaction, regret? None could know. Hunger does not rejoice. Hunger does not mourn. It only seeks the next meal. Behind him, Visas knelt. She saw nothing, not stars, not ships, not even the form of her master, but she felt his will like chains of gravity. Each thought of his was a command, each breath a verdict. She wondered, distantly, if she had a voice still. If she could scream, would he hear? Would he care? Her answer came in the void where questions go to die. In time, the galaxy would speak. Of Kutar in hushed tones. They would call it a tragedy, a massacre, a horror beyond reason. But they would not understand, because Kutar was not war. War leaves scars, ruins, memories. Tar left nothing. It was ritual, it was hunger made holy, and from that day forward, the Force would never sleep again. Chapter 8. The Wrath of Cyan Pain is a Teacher. For Darth Cyan, it was the only one that never left him. He woke to pain. He walked in pain. He slept when sleep would come inside pain's hollow embrace. Once, he had been a man of flesh, a warrior of the Sith, strong enough to break bone with his bare hands. But flesh betrays, flesh rots. It bends to time and age, and so Cyan broke his body until it could break no more. And then he held it together with hate. Every scar was a memory, every fracture a vow. He did not heal because healing meant surrender. He endured because endurance was power. His body became a tomb, shattered 1,000 times and pieced together by will alone. His flesh hung like rags on iron bones. His veins burned with the venom of his own resolve. He was agony given shape, walking across a galaxy that had forgotten how to scream, and he hunted. The ruins of Malachor whispered to him as he strode through the Treyu's Academy's black halls. Shadows clung to his heels, coiling like serpents. Here, in this place where war had ended and wounds had begun, the dark side pulsed like a beating heart. It had kept him alive when reason begged for death. It had taught him that pain was not weakness, it was freedom. But even here, in the depths of darkness, his thoughts were not his own. They drifted to her, the exile, Mitra Surik, the wound that walked, the one who had slain a world, not with rage, but with silence. He remembered her not as a friend, nor as an enemy, but as a scar carved into the galaxy, a scar like his own. And scars recognize each other. She had returned. He felt it, like a spark against his nerves, a blade against raw skin. She was no longer Jedi, no longer Sith, but something in between. Something dangerous, something that must break. He left Malachor in a storm of fury. His ship a black spear against the stars, cut across forgotten space, hunting whispers of her name. Each lead was a corpse waiting to happen. Jedi enclaves burned in his wake. Smugglers learned to fear the rasp of his breath before death claimed them. Planets turned silent as tombs. Everywhere he walked, pain followed, not because he sought it, but because pain was all he had left to give. He found her on Nar Shaddaa, first just a glimpse through the haze of neon and smoke. A shadow moving among beggars and hunters, gathering allies like bones to a blade. He could have struck then, could have torn the life from her throat and ended the question that gnawed at him. But questions lingered, and Sion was a man who suffered. His questions, like he suffered his wounds with wrath, he followed instead, through dead temples, through wreckage of wars long past, always a breath behind her. He watched her gather strength, watched her bind broken souls to her Corsican rand, a murderer with laughter in his teeth, Bodior scarred by the same war that had scarred them all. Even Vizsla, his master's thrall, now walked at her side. It burned him more than any wound. That Vizsla, blind and bound, would turn from Nihilus, and from him. He had offered her truth once. That strength was survival, that pain was freedom. She had chosen another path, chosen the exile, betrayal. The word tasted like blood in his mouth. He struck on Korriban. The valley of the Sith tombs lay drowned in red dust and silence. Winds howled through the canyons like the voices of the dead. Here, among the bones of empires, Sion waited when she came. Cloaked in grey, her steps were steady, unhurried. She did not fear him. That angered him more than any blade. Mitra Surik, he rasped, his voice a fracture in the air. You should have stayed, gone. She stopped before him, eyes hard as stone, and you should have let yourself die. The words were knives, but Sion laughter sounded like glass breaking. Die, I have died 1,000 times, Jedi, and each time pain brings me back. It is my gift, it is my curse, and it will be yours. He ignited his blade, a crimson line screaming against the wind. His body moved with the weight of mountains, each step cracking stone, each strike shattering air. She met him with a blade of silver fire, her movements swift, precise, born not of anger but of something colder, resolve. Steel rang against steel. Sparks bled into dust. The canyon became a furnace of motion, of fury. Sion fought not for victory, but for vindication. Every blow was a question. Why do you return when all that waits for you is death? Why do you endure when there is no hope? She gave no answer, only silence and steel. He broke her one sent, her crashing against the tomb wall. His saber rose for the final stroke, and in that instant he saw her eyes. They were calm, not with peace, not with surrender, but with defiance, born of something he could not name. It was not strength, it was not hate, it was acceptance. You cannot kill me, she said softly, because you are already dead. The words struck harder than any blade. He faltered just for a breath. But in that breath, she moved her saber, carving across his side, searing rotten flesh. Pain erupted, sweet and searing. He fell to one knee, laughter bubbling from a throat raw with rage and agony. "Strike me down," he hissed. "It will change nothing. I will rise again. I always rise again." She did not answer. She turned and walked away, leaving him kneeling in the dust. And for the first time in years, Darth Sion felt something colder than pain. Doubt. When the shadows closed around him, he did not fight them. He let the darkness lift him, piece him together once more. Flesh burned, bones screamed, but hatred mended what life could not. He rose, slower this time, his breath a rasp of broken glass. The exile had spared him, not out of mercy. Out of certainty, she believed he could be saved. That belief was a wound deeper than any saber cut, and wounds, like hunger, never heal. Far away, stars burned indifferent. The galaxy whispered of Nihilus, of hunger without end. But Sion knew a truth more terrible. Hunger consumes, pain endures, and in endurance there is forever. Chapter 9. The unseen warrant began as whispers. A missing Jedi here, a vanished enclave there. No bodies, no battles. Just absence quiet as the breath before a scream. The council called it chance at first. A galaxy at war breeds chaos. Ships disappear. Worlds fall silent. But silence has a shape, and this one was spreading. They met in secret, what few masters remained, cloaked in fear that tasted of ash. They spoke of new threats, of remnants of the Sith. But what they faced was no Sith as they understood it. Sith fought wars. Sith built empires. This was different. This did not fight. It fed. Across the rim, voices in the Force flickered and died without sound, without struggle. One by one, the Jedi vanished, not slain, not hunted, but unmade. Their names lingered like echoes, and then even those faded. No one knew where, no one knew how, only that something was listening, and the more they feared, the louder that silence grew. The Jedi fled to shadows, two worlds unmarked by charts, two hollowed asteroids and nameless moons. They cloaked themselves in meditation, in silence, hoping to hide. But silence is where he lived. Nihilus, the wound that walked, the voice that devoured. He did not need armies or fleets. He was absence given purpose, and absence cannot be stopped by walls or weapons. He did not track their bodies. He tasted their presence, and when he spoke, that presence died. Entire enclaves fell without a cry, their halls collapsing into stillness, as if life had never touched them. On Dantwan, the Jedi believed the ruins would shelter them, broken stones guarding broken vows. They knelt in what remained of their council chamber, whispering mantras against fear. But fear had already called him. When the darkness came, it was not with ships or soldiers. It came as a weight in the air, pressing like the deep of the sea. The torches guttered, the wind died, and then, like a bell tolling across the void, a soundless scream rolled through the halls. They fell where they stood, their bodies whole, their faces calm as though sleep had claimed them, but they would never wake. The survivors spoke of nothing, for there were none to speak. The Republic saw only the husks, cold and empty, and wondered if plague had taken root. They did not understand. How could they? What disease leaves the flesh untouched, yet strips the soul away? What weapon kills without wound? The truth was worse than death. This was not the end of bodies. It was the end of presence. What cannot be spoken cannot be defended. And so they did not speak. Visa's Ma felt it all. Across the gulf of stars, she felt each life snuffed out, each light quenched. At Nihilus's side she knelt, blind to the world, but chained to his will. The hunger in him swelled with every death, a tide that drowned her in whispers. He did not exult. He did not rage. Hunger has no triumph, no satisfaction. It only seeks and seeks and seeks again. Sometimes she wondered if he even remembered he had been a man, or if the mask she saw was only a hollow thing, worn by a void that had forgotten its own name. And still he hunted, not for war, not for conquest, for sustenance. The galaxy itself became a feast. The Jedi were not soldiers to him, they were fuel. And as their numbers thinned, the Republic's hope thinned with them. For the Jedi were the guardians of light, and the light was guttering. In the deep of space, aboard the Ravager, rituals began dark and patient. The lines between hunger and doctrine blurred, and what Nihilus became was no longer Sith, no longer Jedi, no longer even life. He was the shadow of all endings. The galaxy trembled, though it did not yet know why, because wars are fought with fire and steel, and what was coming was neither. It was a war no one could see, against an enemy no one could touch, a war already lost before it began. And in the hollow places of the Force, where silence reigns and echoes linger, Nihilus listened. Always he listened. Chapter 10, The Return. Of the Exilometra, Surik returned to a galaxy she barely recognized. Years had passed since the war that broke her, but its scars had not faded. They had only deepened, carved into planets, into people, into the Force itself. She had left the Jedi Order in silence, cast out for a wound she did not understand. A wound that bled not blood, but essence. Malachor had ended the Mandalorian Wars, but the cost was beyond reckoning. She had given the order. She had fired the mass shadow generator. And in that instant, an entire fleet, countless lives, and a piece of herself had been erased. The others called it victory. She called it exile. When she stepped off the freighter onto the smuggler's moon of Nar Shaddaa, she felt the galaxy, like a storm pressing on her skin, not through the force knot as she once had, but as fragments, shards of sound and feeling cutting into her. She was not Jedi anymore. She was something else, something forgotten. Yet the echoes clung to her like ghosts, and in those echoes she felt the hunger, distant but growing. She did not know its name yet, only that it was devouring everything. She once swore to protect. Her first steps were slow, cautious, through streets choked with neon and smoke. Nar Shaddaa was a place where law died long ago, where credits spoke louder than blood, where survival meant compromise. It suited her well. She had no temple to return to, no council to hear her. All that remained was the will to endure and the faint hope that some of the Order had endured as well. But what she found was worse than death. She found fear. Jedi whispers traded like contraband in back rooms. Names spoken in half-breaths. Masters in hiding. Padawans scattered like ash on the wind. And beneath those whispers, a darker one, shadow that hunted them without blade, without mercy, without trace. She was not alone for long. Trouble follows those who seek it, and she sought it like a map. A Tonrand found her first, or perhaps she found him, a man with laughter sharp as a knife, a killer's calm behind his grin. He claimed he was just a pilot, just a drifter, but lies cling to men like that the way smoke clings to fire. She didn't trust him, but trust was a luxury the dead enjoyed. The living needed allies. Baudur came next, soldier broken in the same war that broke her. His voice soft, his eyes haunted by the memory of Malakor's crimson skies. He had built the weapon that ended the Mandalorians. He carried that sin like a chain, same as her. They spoke little of the past. Some wounds fester when named. Others bleed only in silence. And then came Visa's Ma, blind, veiled, her presence a quiet tremor in the Force. She had served Nihilus, lived in his shadow, and yet turned away. Why? Mitra did not know. Perhaps even hunger can starve of purpose. Perhaps some chains can be broken by will alone. But in Visas's silence, she sensed more than pain. She sensed devotion not to Nihilus, not any more but to her, to the wound that walked. Together they began to gather what remained of the lost Jedi, across Dantuan's green ruins, in the icy wastes of Telos, among the tombs of Korriban. She sought them, some answered. Others turned away, too afraid to stand, too tired to hope. Each meeting felt heavier, as if destiny itself pressed upon her shoulders like the weight of dead stars. She did not want this role. She had not returned for glory or redemption. She had returned because the galaxy was bleeding, and no one else would staunch the wound. And always, at the edge of hearing, she felt it. That void, that hunger, it grew. With every day, every whisper of vanished Jedi, every world that fell silent. She asked Visas what it was, and the Miraluka spoke in a voice barely more than a breath. He does not kill as others kill. He does not conquer. He consumes. The Force itself feeds his hunger. And you, her words faltered. You are the only one he cannot devour. Mitra did not understand, not yet. She only knew that Nihilus was coming, and when he came, there would be no fleet, no army, no second Malachor to save them. Only a handful of broken warriors standing against the void. And still, she pressed on, because if the galaxy would fall, it would not fall in silence, not while she still drew breath. In the shadow of dead temples and shattered Republic outposts, the exile began to forge something, knew not a Jedi Order, not a Sith Brotherhood, but a gathering of those who remembered what it meant to fight. A Mandalorian came to her, a warlord, called Mandalore, armored in Beskar, scarred by a dozen battles. He laughed at talk of destiny, spat on the word Jedi, and swore he would never bow to their code. And yet, when the call came, he followed her, not for faith, for honor, for war, for the promise of blood. Others joined, a scattered few, not enough for hope, but enough to try. And sometimes that is all the galaxy needs. The path led them to Telos, to the brink of the unknown. Rumors whispered of a ship, a corpse of Durasteel, a ruin that should not fly, drifting like a wound across the stars. The Ravager, Nihilus's vessel, it had been a warship once, proud and terrible. Now it was a carcass held together by hatred and hunger, and it was moving toward Telos, not to conquer, to consume. The ritual had begun. When Mitra heard, she felt the echo like a blade between her ribs. She saw Malachor again, heard the silence after the scream, tasted ash on her tongue. This would be worse. Telos was fragile, its restoration barely begun. If Nihilus fed on it, the wound in the Force would yawn wider, and nothing would stop it from swallowing the galaxy whole. She gathered her allies. She called her debts. The Mandalorians answered with steel and fire. Smugglers lent their guns. Old friends drew blades long left rusting. They would take the fight to the Ravager, storm its corpse halls, and cut the hunger out by the root or die and feed it themselves. As the fleet prepared to burn sky above Telos, Mitra stood alone in the observation deck, watching the stars. Her reflection stared back at her from the Transparistela woman, scarred, hollowed, yet unbroken. She wondered if she was ready, wondered if anyone ever was. The war had taken her name, her rank, her faith. It had left her with nothing but the will to fight. And sometimes, she thought, that might be enough. Behind her, Visas approached, her steps soft as dust. He knows. You are coming, she said. He hungers for you above all others. Mitra did not turn. Her voice was iron. Then let him starve. Chapter 11. The siege above Nihilus the Ravager emerged from hyperspace like a carcass dragged through fire. Its hull was a wound of shattered durasteel, torn plating hanging like ragged flesh. Yet it moved with the inevitability of a falling star. Where engines should have burned, there was only darkness, a silence that swallowed the hum of space. It should not have flown. It should not have lived. But it did, because its master willed it so. And hunger needs no engines. Telos shimmered in the distance, fragile and green, a world being reborn from the ruin of war. From orbit, its seas glimmered like shards of glass. To the Ravager, it was not beauty, it was sustenance. Nihilus stood at the shattered viewport. Of the bridge, a figure of stillness draped in shadows. His mask, pale and cracked, caught the dying light of the stars. He made no gesture. He gave no command. Yet the ship obeyed, turning toward Telos with the patience of a predator that knows escape is impossible. In the depths of the vessel, rituals bled into the wall's dark glyphs, carved by the hands of slaves who no longer breathed. Sith cultists moved like phantoms through the corridors, their chants a chorus of hunger echoing through the void. They did not serve for power, nor for promise. They served because they had nothing else. Nihilus had taken even their will, leaving only obedience. And in that hollow obedience, the ritual deepened. When it was complete, Telos would die without flame or fracture. It would simply vanish, its life ripped away, its essence poured into the abyss that wore a mask. But the void was not empty of defiance. From the shadow of the planet's moons, a fleet ignited the dark. Republic cruisers, scarred from wars they barely survived, burned their drives bright as dawn. Mandalorian warships flanked them, angular beasts painted in blood-red sigils, their hulls humming with weapons forged for conquest. At their heart, a single freighter-patched thing of rust and scars slipped through the formation like a knife between ribs. Aboard it, Mitra Surik stood with her crew. Armor clasped tight, saber at her side, her breath slow and steady though her pulse hammered in her throat. Before her, the halotable flickered with the Ravagers, Imogen, angular corpse draped. In shadow, vast as a floating city. Even in blue light, its presence pressed against her skin like a weight. It wasn't a ship, It was a wound dragged through the stars. Mandalore's voice cut through the hum. We hit it hard, we hit it fast. Boarding pods on my mark. My men will carve a path to its heart, or die trying. His helmet tilted toward her, visor burning like coals. You wanted a war, Jedi. This is it. She met his gaze, calm as stone. Not a war, a sacrifice. Bodua frowned from across. The table, you don't mean I do. Her voice was iron. The Ravager won't fall to turbolaser. That ship is held together by will, not metal. Cut the will, and the corpse dies. Aton leaned against the bulkhead, smirking to hide the crack in his voice. So we storm a haunted wreck full of Sith cult freaks, and pray the god wearing a mask doesn't swallow us whole. Great plan. Best one we have, she said. Silence settled. Beyond the hull, space flared with fire as the fleets clashed green lances of turbolaser, fire shredding the dark. Mandalorian assault craft streaking like meteors toward the Ravager. The deck shook as the first salvo struck. Somewhere far away, metal screamed. Mitra turned to Visas Ma, who stood motionless, her face hidden behind a crimson veil. You've been there. What waits for us? Visas's voice was a whisper of broken glass. Nothing, everything. A hunger that does not end, and in its center, a void wearing the shape of a man. Mitra nodded, her fingers closed around the hilt at her belt, feeling the weight, the warmth. Then let's end it. The freighter burned toward the Ravager, weaving through firestorms of light and shrapnel. Around them, Mandalorian pods slammed into the hull, magnetic clamps shrieking as they bit into dead metal. Warriors poured through the breaches, their war cries echoing through the blackened corridors. Blasters snarling, Biscad blades flashing red in emergency lights. The Ravager swallowed them whole. For every Mandalorian who broke through, 2 fell to crimson sabers and shadows that moved like smoke. But still they pushed on, because Mandalorians do not break. They either conquer or they die trying. Team boarded in silence. The air inside was thick as oil, tasting of rust and rot and something older, something wrong. The walls groaned as if alive. Voices whispered from the metal, voices that were not voices, but echoes of hunger and despair. Aton muttered a curse. Baldor gripped his rifle until his knuckles whitened. Even Mandalore's visor seemed to dim, as if the light itself bent away. This ship, Visas murmured, is a graveyard that refuses to lie still. They pressed on, boots clanging against grates slick with shadow. Corpses lined the hall's Republic soldiers, Mandalorians, Sith cultists, soul empty-eyed. Their faces frozen in peace that was not peace but erasure. The Force thrummed like a sick heartbeat, pulling them deeper, toward the core, toward him, and then they felt it. A weight in the air, pressing like the deep of the ocean. Breath burned in their throats, skin crawled. The hunger was awake. They reached the command deck as the battle outside roared like a dying star. Mandalorians fell by the dozen, their cries sparking through the cum before fading into static. Republic cruisers burned, their hulks drifting like black suns. And yet the Ravager endured, its silence louder than any cannon. Because it was never a ship, it was an altar. And upon that altar stood its god, Nihilus. He did not move as they entered, did not turn. His mask caught the light of dying stars, pale and pitiless. His presence filled the room like a tide of night. Visas fell to her knees, trembling not in fear, but in memory, in chains she thought broken but which now pulled tight. A tone cursed under his breath. Mandalore reached for his blaster. Metra lifted her saber, its silver flame a fragile thread against the void. The mask tilted, and then the sound came, not sound, not truly. A resonance that shook the marrow, a wordless hunger that spoke to the bone, to the soul. Aton screamed and dropped to his knees. Bowdor staggered, clutching his skull. Even Mandalore grunted, his armor ringing under the weight of it. Metra stood, barely. Her breath came ragged, her body screaming to kneel, to yield, to vanish, into that silence. But she did not move. She could not, because if she fell, there would be nothing left to rise. She stepped forward, blade burning, eyes locked on the mask. "I am not afraid of you," she said. Her voice was steady, but in the hollow that was Nihilus, there was no fear, no rage, no anything, only need, and hunger always wins. For now, Chapter 12. Hunger meets the wound. The air on the Ravager's bridge was a void that crushed breath into silence. Stars burned beyond the shattered viewport, but their light felt thin, smothered by a darkness that was not space but will. Nihilus stood at its heart, a shape draped in shadow, a mask that drank the fire of the galaxy and gave nothing back. His presence pressed against the bones of every living thing in the room, a weight without form, an ocean without shore. Metra Surik faced him with a blade of silver fire, its glow a fragile thread in the abyss. Behind her, Aton knelt, gasping. Bowdor leaned against the wall, blood on his lips, his rifle fallen. Mandalore was down on one knee, armor cracked, visor flickering. Only Visas stood, or rather, struggled to stand, her hands trembling as if the gravity itself sought to grind her into the deck. And then Nihilus spoke, not with words, not as flesh speaks. It was sound without shape, meaning without tongue, a resonance that crawled through marrow and memory, tearing language apart. The scream was endless and voiceless, and yet they heard it inside their heads, inside the places where thought becomes self. Aton clutched his skull and shrieked. Bowdor's breath broke into a rasping sob. Even Mandalore swayed, his will splintering. Metra felt it too, like claws sinking into her soul, rending, hollowing. It was hunger, pure and absolute. He did not hate her, did not fear her, did not even see her as enemy. To Nihilus, she was food, nothing more. A wound in the Force, bleeding essence so rich it blinded him to all else. She was the banquet at the end of all famine. And when he devoured her, when that wound closed inside him, his hunger would end. The galaxy would end. Everything would fall silent. He raised his hand, a gesture, slow as Dumand the deck screamed as if wrenched by unseen hands. Aton slid across the floor like a gull. Bowdor slammed against a console, metal crunching. Mandalore roared and fired, bolts of plasma hissing through the dark only to vanish before reaching the mask, swallowed by an unseen maw. Meat staggered under the weight of his pull. The force around her churned, currents spiraling into the abyss at Nihilus's core. It tried to drag her in, tear her apart, molecule by molecule, thought by thought. Her saber wavered, her knees buckled. But somewhere in the storm, she remembered Malakoth, red skies, the dead voices, the silence after the scream. She remembered standing on a bridge, giving an order that shattered a world. And she remembered why. To end a war, to save lives, to stop hunger before it began. She was the wound, and wounds endure. Metra pushed, not with rage, not with fear, with something deeper, a will that had walked through exile and found strength in what was broken. The hunger clawed at her, ripping, screaming without sound, but she did not give. She stepped forward, her boots ringing against the metal like the toll of a bell. Nihilus tilted his head. His mask reflected her flame, and for the first time he moved. A blur of black. A saber hissed to life, crimson and cold as arterial blood. The clash when their blades met shook the bridge like a thunderclap. Sparks spat into the void as silver and scarlet screamed against each other. He struck like gravity, each blow a collapsing star. She met him stroke for stroke, her body screaming, her breath ragged, but her mind a calm center in the storm. There, sabers whirled, weaving a web of light through the dark. Behind them, consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The deck trembled as the Ravager groaned under the strain of battle outside. And all the while, the hunger raged not from his blade, but from his being. Every time their sabers locked, she felt it trying to pour through her, to rip her from herself, to make her nothing. It would have worked on any Jedi, any Sith, but she was neither. She was absence given shape. She was what he was reflected. The moment she understood that, the tide shifted. She broke the lock, spun, and drove a kick into his chest. He staggered not from strength, but from the truth that touched him in that instant. For the first time, the mask seemed to falter, tilting as if listening. Mitra saw it then, clear as stars through storm. There was nothing behind it, no man, no will, only a hollow cry carved into the force, bound to bone and masked by hunger alone. "You are nothing," she said, her voice cutting through the void like steel. The sound that tore from him was not anger, it was need, desperate, endless. He lunged, faster than thought, his blade a scarlet comet. She caught it, barely, there. Sabers shrieking as they ground together. His free hand rose, and the force slammed into her like a hammer, hurling her across the deck. Her spine struck metal. Her breath exploded from her lungs. Pain sang through her bones. He came on, unstoppable, his presence a black sun devouring all light. But Mitra rose. She spat blood. She raised her blade. And as he bore down, she opened herself not to the force, but to the wound, to the emptiness where power once lived, to the silence she had carried since Malachor. When Nihilus struck, that silence met him, and in it he saw himself. The hunger faltered. For a heartbeat, a breath, the pull ceased. The void inside him stared into the void inside her and understood. They were the same. Two absences circling an endless drain. But one had chains and one did not. The ritual shattered. The currents broke. His power surged, then buckled, recoiling like a serpent into its own jaws. He screamed a soundless wail. That cracked the durasteel, splintered the glass, sent Mandalore to his knees with blood streaming from his ears. Visas clutched her veil, sobbing without tears, and Mitra moved. Her blade swept low, carved through black robes, bit into what passed for flesh. The mask turned toward her, as if to speak, as if to plead, but no words came, only silence. When her saber pierced his heart if heart, it was the hunger imploded. Shadows howled inward, spiraling into the hollow where Nihilus had stood. His form crumbled like ash in a storm. The mask fell last, striking the deck with a sound like a closing tomb. And then silence, a silence that was not hunger, but peace. For the first time since Malachor, Mitra Surik could breathe without tasting ash. The Ravager groaned, shuddered. Its hull began to split, torn apart not by fire, but by the will that had held it together unraveling into nothing. Outside, Mandalorian warships wheeled away as the corpse ship collapsed, its bones breaking against the stars. Metra bent, fingers closing around the fallen mask. It was cold, weightless, empty, yet somehow it still felt as if something inside it watched. She stared into the black slits, and for a moment thought she heard a whisper, not a word, not a sound, but a promise. Hunger never dies, it only waits. She dropped the mask and turned to her crew. Time to go, she said. Her voice was steady. Behind her, the void swallowed the Ravager whole. Chapter 13. The death of the name the Ravager broke apart in silence. No flames, no screaming metal, no blaze to mark its death, only a slow unmaking, as if space itself rejected the thing that had lingered too long in its veins. Fractured hull plates drifted into the void, glowing faintly in the light of a distant sun, scattering like bones from a forgotten grave. The warship that had been Nihilus's throne was gone, and with it, the ritual telos lived. For now, aboard the battered freighter limping through debris fields, Mitra Surik watched through the viewport as the wreck dissolved into darkness. Her reflection stared back at her pell, drawn, eyes hollowed by the gravity of what had passed. Around her, the others moved in silence. Aton checked consoles with hands that shook despite his grin. Bodur muttered over burned-out circuits, his jaw tight with unspoken thoughts. Mandalore loomed like an iron statue in the corner, silent even for him, and Visas Ma knelt in the shadows, head bowed, veil stained with ash that was not ash. But memory, Mitra said nothing. She only breathed, steadying the storm inside. Because something had changed, not just in the galaxy, not just in the Force, but in her. She had looked into Nihilus and seen the truth. There had been no man, no warrior, no Sith. The mask had not hidden a soul. It had hidden the absence of one. Nihilus had died long before his body fell. What she killed on the Ravager was not life. It was hunger given form, an echo pretending at flesh, a name stretched across a void until even the sound of it frayed. And now that name was gone, but the idea remained. As the freighter slipped into hyperspace, Mitra closed her eyes and reached not for power, not for clarity, but for understanding. The Force met her not as warmth, not as a tide of light or dark, but as something fractured, like glass underfoot. It shivered through her senses, bleeding with echoes. Malachor, Qatar, the Ravager. Worlds broken not by war, but by silence. Nihilus had not been the first wound in the Force, nor would he be the last, because the galaxy was full of scars. And where there are scars, there will always be those who seek to tear them wider. She thought of his mask, cold and hollow in her hands. She had left it behind on the Ravager, but in her mind it lingered, white bone cracked by time, black slits that swallowed starlight. It was more than Durasteel. It was a question. Could hunger truly die, or does it wait, as all voids do, patient as eternity? Aten's voice broke the quiet, rough and too loud. So, we won, right? Tell me this counts as a win, because I've had just about enough haunted death ships for one lifetime. Mitra opened her eyes. The stars stretched like white fire. Through the viewport, endless, cold. She wanted to tell him yes, wanted to believe it herself. But the word caught in her throat, heavy with truths she could not give voice to. Visa spoke instead, her tone soft as falling ash. You cannot kill hunger. You can only starve it. For a time, no one argued, because in the silence that followed, they all felt it, that faint pull at the edge of thought, like a whisper. Pressed against a locked door, Nihilus was gone, but the wound remained, and the wound remembers. The galaxy would speak of this day as the death of a Sith Lord. They would carve his name into the stones of their archives, write it in the blood of their histories. Darth Nihilus, Lord of Hunger. They would speak of his fall as a victory for the Jedi, for the Republic, for life itself. But the truth was simpler. Darth Nihilus had not died because he was slain. He had died because his idea broke. And what is an idea, if not a shadow waiting for another shape? Mitra stood and turned away from the stars. Her crew looked to Huraton with defiance in his grin, Bodor with quiet loyalty, Mandalore with a warrior's pride. Visas with something like faith. They waited for words, orders, purpose. She gave them none, because the path ahead was as hollow as the one behind. And in that hollow, something stirred. What died on the Ravager was not a man. It was not even a Sith. It was a possibility. Truth the Force had never meant to bear. That absence could live. That emptiness could hunger. That the bonds of life could be broken and worn like chains by a will that was not will at all. Nihilus had proved that the Force itself could be twisted into a maw. That the song that binds stars could be drowned in a single scream. His mask drifts still, perhaps somewhere in the black between worlds, or buried under stone, or clutched in the hands of those who dream of power beyond passion, beyond reason. And if that mask is ever worn again, if that hunger is ever whispered to life, the galaxy will bleed anew. Because hunger does not die. It waits, it listens, it learns, and, in the heart of the void, echoes linger. Chapter 14. The Mask, the Watchers. The mask survived. It should not have. The Ravager tore itself apart in silence, the ritual collapsing into void, its bones scattering across the black like the relics of a dead god. Fire consumed what hunger had not hollowed. Gravity dragged the rest into Telus's shadow, where pieces burned like falling stars. But the mask did not burn. It drifted, weightless and patient, through the husks of shattered plating, past corpses frozen in eternal screams. It passed through fire and came out untouched, because things like that do not die with their master. They endure, they wait. For days it wandered the wreckage fields, a white shard against the dark, cracked yet whole, empty yet listening. Salvagers came first, crawling like insects through the bones of the warship, their ships tethered to greed. One of them found it tangled in the ribs of a corridor that no longer existed. He laughed when he saw it, thinking it a trophy, a piece of history to fetch a price in the markets of Nar Shaddaa. He did not laugh long. The whispers began before he left orbit, faint, like breath against glass, threading through the hum of his engines, through the tick of his heartbeat. At first, he thought it memory, then dream, then madness. But when he awoke to find the mask resting beside his bed, though he swore he'd locked it away in a crate of Durasteel, the fear began. By the time they found his ship drifting cold, there was no sign of struggle, no wound, no blood, just the mask, resting in the pilot's chair, its black slits staring at the stars. From there it moved, through smugglers' holds and black market vaults, through the hands of collectors who whispered of its curse, even as they stroked its cracked surface with trembling fingers. Some said it spoke, not in words, but in hunger's desires that were not theirs, cravings that hollowed them from within, until they left nothing but silence. Others said it watched, and in that gaze they saw what they feared most, not death, but the absence of self. Years passed, decades, empires fell, republics rose, and still the mask lingered, an artifact of a war no one remembered, a face from a legend most believed was a lie. Historians called Nihilus a myth, a tale, woven by exiles to frighten children, a ghost story for failed Jedi. The Force does not hunger, they said. The Force does not break. They were wrong. The mask remembered. It passed into temples where no prayers were spoken, where acolytes traced glyphs in blood and whispered names that had not been uttered in centuries. It rested in tombs cut deep into worlds scarred by shadow, where the stones still remembered. Screams. In the dark, it listened. In the silence, it waited. And sometimes, when the stars aligned, when the air was thick with war and the Force bled raw, it spoke, not in sound, in need. Those who heard it never understood what it promised, only that the promise burned through their marrow like a fever. Some tore down orders for it. Some slaughtered brothers for it. All of them wore it in the end, and all of them starved, because hunger cannot be fed. Hunger feeds on you. In time, the mask vanished again, swallowed by history, buried beneath layers of dust and denial. Scholars forgot its shape. Holocrons lost its name. But the Force does not forget. It cannot. Because what Nihilus was, what the mask is more than flesh, more than Sith. It is an echo carved into the song of existence. A note of silence that lingers after the music ends. And silence always returns. Chapter 15. The Will of the Force. The Force had always been a tide, rising and falling with the currents of life and death, light and dark. It was a song, ancient and eternal, sung through the bones of stars and the souls of living beings. But after the wars, after Nihilus and the Ravager, that song fractured. The melody splintered into shards that cut like glass. The Force did not break in anger or passion. It broke in silence and absence, where presence once reigned. Jedi Masters and Sith Lords alike felt it first as a tremor, a faint discord beneath their touch. The Force did not answer their calls with the same clarity. It hesitated, wavering like a candle fighting the wind. No longer was it a river flowing through all things. It was a mirror cracked, reflecting broken images of hope and despair. Mitra, Surik, knew this truth better than most. Her connection had been severed and remade by wounds deeper than any saber strike. She had stood at the edge of oblivion and returned to find the Force hollowed out like a bone picked clean. She could still sense its presence, but it was distant, cold, and unpredictable. The harmony that had once guided Jedi and Sith was gone, replaced by echoes that twisted understanding. Without the Force's full will, neither Jedi nor Sith could command it as before. The great orders fractured. Jedi fled into hiding, clutching the remnants of their teachings as the galaxy's light dimmed. Sith, stripped of their blood-red certainty, turned on each other in desperate bids for power, their shadows growing long but weak. Balance was no longer balance. It was a wound that bled into everything it touched, staining stars and souls alike. The very essence of the Force seemed to weep silent tears that left no mark but left the cosmos poorer for their absence. In the darkened halls of forgotten temples, ancient glyphs flickered weakly, their power diminished. Holocrons whispered. Secrets that no longer bore meaning, lost in translation across the fractured currents. Force-sensitive beings wandered, adrift in a sea that no longer recognized them as masters or servants. They were mariners without stars, ghosts without anchor. This new reality was neither victory nor defeat. It was a bleeding, a slow erosion of the Force's will, its influence fading as the scars of war and hunger deepened. The galaxy trembled before a future where even the Force might be unmade, where the light and dark would dissolve into nothingness, leaving only the void. Yet, in this absence, something waited. Not a presence, but a potential, an echo of what had been and what might be. The Force itself was listening, folding inward like a star, collapsing on its core, gathering strength in silence. Mitra Surik stood alone on the bridge of a starship, gazing into the void. She felt the Force's whisper, not a command, not a comfort, but a warning. The war was not over. It had only changed shape, and where the Force bled, others would rise to claim what was left. Because the Force does not forget, it does not forgive, it waits. And in its waiting, the galaxy's fate hung by a thread thinner than light. Chapter 16. The echoes in the void, in the vast emptiness between stars. Where light is swallowed and silence reigns, echoes take shape. They do not belong to the living or the dead, but to the spaces between fragments of memory, whispers of what once was, and omens of what may come. Nihilus was one such echo, a wound carved into the Force that sang without voice and hungered without end. But was he truly Sith? Or was he something else entirely? Something darker, older, beyond meaning? The historians argued in sterile halls far from the battlefields and broken worlds. Sith zealots claimed him as their own, a twisted lord born of passion and rage, wielding hunger as a weapon. Jedi scholars dismissed him as a shadow, a tragedy of corrupted power. But none could grasp the full truth, because Nihilus was not merely a man or a title. He was an event, a rupture in the fabric of existence. To those who encountered him, he was a force of nature. The hunger that consumed did not discriminate. It did not fight. It did not hate. It erased. Entire planets fell silent, their life and light drained until only ash remained. Jedi vanished, not with the clash of sabers, but with the fading of presence, like stars extinguished by an unseen eclipse. This absence, this void, was not empty. It was filled with echoes, fragments of souls' memories twisted into screams, silent cries frozen in time. The Force itself recoiled from it, recoiled from the idea that it could be undone, unmade, erased. Nihilus embodied that fear, the possibility that the Force, the eternal song binding all life, could be silenced. Mitra Surik had faced this echo and survived, becoming both the wound and the cure. She bore scars that sang of exile and survival, a bridge between light and dark, presence and absence. In her, the Force found its paradox, a living contradiction, a hope amid decay. Yet even she knew the echoes would not rest. Hunger does not die. It transforms, mutates, waiting for the moment to rise again. In the shadows of the galaxy, cults whispered of the mask that watched, of the hunger that listens, of the wound that never heals. The void is patient. It remembers. On forgotten worlds, where the stars seem dimmest, those echoes stir shapes shifting in darkness, shadows growing long. They are not Sith, they are not Jedi, they are something else, fragments of the wound, left behind, hungry for return. The galaxy's scars bleed still, and in their bleeding, new horrors take root. History will forget the details, warp the truth, and bury the names beneath layers of myth. But the echoes endure waiting, listening, shaping the silence between stars. Chapter 17. The Temple That Remembers. The name alone carried weight beyond history, scar etched deep into the bones of the galaxy. It was where all began, where the dark first clawed through light, and where the wounds that would never heal first opened. The air there was thick, with memory echoes of screams and silence folded into stone. The sky bled red, forever stained by betrayal, sacrifice, and ruin. The Traeus core lay beneath the shattered surface, a dark heart pulsing with malevolence. It was a place that remembered everything: the violence, the sorrow, the hunger. The walls themselves were alive with whispers, etched with names long, forgotten by time but etched forever in agony. Jedi and Sith alike had fallen there, their blood seeping into the soil, their cries trapped in the dark. Nihilus's origin was woven into this tapestry of pain not born but created, a wound bleeding. From the Traeus core, an absence given form. The hunger that had devoured worlds was born here, in the shadow of betrayal and power unchecked. It seeped into the Force itself, twisting the currents into something broken and endless. Mitra Surik had returned once more to Malachor, drawn by the pull of the past and the weight of what remained. The temple was empty yet alive, a tomb that breathed. The silence pressed on her, thick and suffocating, but she did not falter. She walked its cracked halls, tracing the glyphs that told of war and despair. The dark whispered to her not promises, but warnings. The wound beneath Malachor still bled. It pulsed with potential, waiting for the moment to rise again. Deep within the temple's heart, she found the remnants of the Traeus core, cracked but unbroken. The dark energy shimmered, faintly, a poison in the Force that refused to die. It was a reminder that some wounds could never heal, that some scars were eternal. Fesusma stood beside her, silent, her sightless eyes reflecting the darkness. "This place remembers everything," she said softly, "not just pain, but hope. The Force itself holds the memory of what was lost and what may come." Me nodded, "And so do we. We carry the burden of these memories, not to repeat the past, but to learn from it." The temple's shadows shifted, as if breathing, as if alive. Somewhere deep beneath, the wound waited patient, eternal, hungry. The galaxy's darkest hour had passed, but the shadow it cast was long. Malachor was the heart of that shadow, and as long as the wound bled, the dark would never be silenced. The Force remembered. The temple remembered. And so must they all. Chapter 18. The voice beyond death. I am the echo between stars. I was there when Nihilus became less, when hunger rose like a tide that drowned planets and Jedi alike. I saw the Ravager crumble, and I heard the silence that followed, a silence more terrifying than any scream. I tell you now, he was not alone. Others will rise, others will hunger. The galaxy is filled with scars, and where there is pain, the void listens. You think hunger is absence, but hunger is a voice, a whisper in the dark. It is a song without melody, a call without sound. It is not emptiness, it is craving. The Force bled from Nihilus's wound, but that bleeding never ceased. It flows through the veins of the galaxy, feeding those who walk the edge, those who bear the echoes of hunger in their hearts. Mitra Surik was the wound's mirror. She reflected emptiness back upon itself and shattered the ritual. But the wound is eternal. It does not end with one fall. It waits, it listens. The mask remains, cracked, empty, but watching. It passes. from hand to hand, whispering secrets no one fully understands. It promises power to the desperate, strength to the broken, but its gift is a curse. For hunger feeds on the soul until nothing remains. The Jedi will rise again, as they always do. The Sith will gather in shadows, as they must. But the hunger is neither Jedi nor Sith. It is something beyond, a force of unmaking that grows in silence. Look to the stars and see the scars. Each one tells a story of hunger, of loss, of emptiness made flesh. The galaxy remembers these stories, and so does the Force. In time, others will come, others who will listen to the hunger's call, others who will wear the mask and carry the silence within. You may believe this is the end, but it is only the beginning of another silence. The void does not forget. The void does not forgive. It waits. And when it speaks again, the galaxy will tremble.